All right, good afternoon, everyone. This is a joint committee briefing for the Ways and Means and the Environment and Transportation Committee. So I'm joined here by members of my committee as well as Chairman Barve and his committee, and he will speak in a second. I just want to thank everyone for joining us this day. I'll use my official gavel one last time. This issue came forward from the Vice Chair of our committee, Delegate Washington, and I'm sorry that he's not here yet. This is my parting gift to him. He wanted a briefing on school buses, the safety issues, the access issues, the fact that there haven't been enough school bus drivers across a lot of our state for a lot of our students. And so this is my parting gift to him, though I plan for my wedding gift to be a little nicer. But I do want to thank everyone for being here today, and I'll pass things along to Chairman Barve.
Thank you very much, Chair Kaiser. It's a great pleasure to and an honor to be with you on your last day chairing a committee or last instance chairing a committee. We also in our committee are very interested about obviously traffic safety. We're interested in the safety of students, but we also have other environmental issues that we're concerned about, moving in the direction of electric school buses and perhaps using them as a mechanism for storing electricity in off-peak and non-school time. So I'll just conclude with that and say it's a pleasure to be here and look forward to the briefing and the questions thereafter. Thank you, Madam Chair.
All right, thank you. And to everyone, while you received the email earlier today with the 5 panels, not all of the named people will be speaking. We're first hearing from the Maryland School Bus Contractors Association. And I'll introduce Erin Appel and let her introduce the others on her team and those who will be speaking. And I remind everyone that you have 5 minutes. There will be a chance for questions at the end.
Great. Thank you very much, Madam Chair, Chair Barve and members. I'm Erin Appel here today representing the Maryland School Bus Contractors Association. We are the statewide association of private companies that own and operate school buses under contract with individual school systems. And I have with me today several bus contractors who you will be hearing from and or who are available to answer questions. Randy Jubb is with Jubb's Bus Service and R.E. Wilson Bus Service out of Anne Arundel County. Gail Kent Reed is with Reed and Reed out of Calvert County. And Steve Nelson is the president of the association. He is with Nelson Bus Company out of Harford County. The school bus driver shortage that we're facing currently is not new, nor is it unique to Maryland, as I'm sure you're all aware. That being said, COVID certainly did not help what was already an issue in the industry. A bit of background on Maryland's school bus contractor system. I think you all should have with you today the 2020 Pupil Transportation Report. And if you'll look at, or if you can go back and reference chart 4, you can see it breaks down the number of vehicles by jurisdiction and also by type, whether contractor or county owned. And you can see that approximately half of the 7,000 plus school buses used to transport children in Maryland are contractor owned. And just about every county in the state relies on contractors. Only Montgomery, Frederick, Talbot, and Prince George's own and operate their own school bus fleets entirely. The rest rely all or in part on school bus contractor companies, which not only own their buses, but also employ the drivers who drive them. The size of the companies varies greatly. Some contractors own as little as 1 or 2 buses. Others own a fleet of 100 school buses and everywhere in between. Another important point to make, I think, is that some counties operate under a formula model by which all contractors and therefore all of their drivers are paid according to the same negotiated pay formula. Other counties operate under a bid system by which contractors must bid on specific routes, and these bids include driver pay. Regardless of the model, on average, school bus drivers in Maryland are currently being paid on average $19 to $20 an hour, which is considerably less than other Class B commercial driver's license holders, which is what school bus drivers are. Dump truck drivers, Amazon drivers, even DoorDash drivers make more and without the additional stress of having a bus full of school kids. I recently spoke with one legislator who referred to driving a school bus as an entry-level job, but that simply is not the case. School bus drivers are frequently parents, oftentimes supporting single-income households or retirees. These are individuals who are supporting themselves and their families and must be paid a fair and adequate wage in order to do so. A small handful of jurisdictions here in Maryland are in the process of trying to offer financial incentives to attract and retain drivers. County Executive Pittman in Anne Arundel was one of the first out of the gate to push for increased driver pay in the form of new hire and retention bonuses, and Howard is now following suit. Calvert also recently reached agreement on increased hourly wages for drivers. The next step will be to ensure that these increases are maintained in future years, so we're not back to square one come next school year. I do thank you all for taking a hard look at how best to address this important issue and making sure our kids have a reliable and safe transportation system to and from school each day. And with that, Chair Kaiser and Chair Barve, if it's okay with you both, I will go ahead and allow the contractors on the panel to speak.
Good with me. How about you, Ann? Go for it.
Great. Randy, do you want to go first?
Okay. Hi, I'm Randall Jubb. I just make a correction. It's Jubb Bus Service and Wilson Bus Service, which is in Pasadena. I think that what I would like to do is to address some of the inadequate wages that we feel that are paid to our drivers. And it's kind of funny because we are the contractor, we make that determination. But in the bid process, and I'm speaking for just Anne Arundel because I'm only located in Anne Arundel, that process has, through the bid process, been very competitive and has, I think it has saved them money in the past that has done that, but shows that from the county's perspective. So we bid our contracts, and they're 12-year contracts. The length of the contract is for a 12-year span, which is also the life of the bus. So when we do that, we're not bidding all our work, all our buses at one time. It's each year, it's 5, 10 buses to be bid for our companies. And so we actually have 12 different 12-year contracts if we are able to obtain them each year. So what has happened is the purchasing department in Anne Arundel County has, I feel that we should be the ones that corrected this problem when we were not able to do that through the years, the past 15 years or more since they started bidding, and actually it's been a lot longer than that. We have submitted because our bids are too high. Even though we were the lowest responsive bidder, they said we went past what they had put a ceiling on these prices. So by doing that, you know, we couldn't change our operation to eventually start including healthcare, higher wages, and retirement programs for our people, because some of the things that they've put in place, being the purchasing department and transportation, has handicapped us. And it's taken 20, 25 years for this, that part of it to manifest itself. We haven't been able to keep up with the current stuff that's going on with other industries. So my frustration has always been not being able to correct the problem myself. So some of the stuff that Pittman's doing is assisting us, and then we'll be dealing with the board going forward. But I just want y'all to be aware, whatever they do and do for us does not solve the long-term problem of us continue pricing. We need to attract the drivers that we need to attract. Along with all the regulation goes on for the driver themselves, yes, it's much more than some of the things that were named by Aaron, as far as those other industry drivers don't have the same restraints that our drivers have. Our job, we feel our pool of drivers narrows every year when they continue to give more regulation on that. So we're trying to pull from a pool of drivers that's pretty small. I just know that the example I gave is when they bid a school for to be built. When the prices come in, they don't reject the people saying you all are too much, you know, you're too high, but they do that to us. And we are in the business of transporting children, and we do not like to skimp on of the severity of what we do. I know that I don't know what else you would like me to speak on, but I did have down a few things that were going on. She mentioned Howard County was now doing something, and we've seen quite a few other counties trying to put things in place to attract drivers, whether they be the bonuses or incentives or and in the future higher wages. We are also faced with what we do with the MBA. Once we get an applicant that is interested in driving, they come through the door. It's such a long process these days to get somebody ready and get them an appointment because of the long wait times for appointments at the MBA. There has been talk of streamlining that for a school bus program up there that's tailored more to school bus drivers versus just CDL people. Because even if you have a CDL with the correct a B license, which is what it takes to drive a school bus, and you also have a P endorsement, which is required, air brakes is required for some companies, and then you're missing just the S, which is the school bus endorsement. You have to take that whole CDL program again. They don't just let you train for this bus and move forward. So we're losing people that way too. They come with a CDL and think that they can pretty easily get a correct endorsement to drive a school bus. They would still need the training on a school bus, stuff that's provided by the MBA, and also by the county certifies them, and they both do behind the wheel training. And I understand there is now going to be another layer federal, and I think Gabriel Ross can speak to that at some point, that they are going to require another test and to be done prior to them people getting their CDL. So they're going to be double tested. And Aaron mentioned we do get a lot of retiree people also, and they just say, nah, I don't want to drive. I'll just go drive for DoorDash or whatever. So it's frustrating for us with the stuff that's coming down, but we would like to see, you know, more availability for testing at the MBA for our school bus drivers when those school bus drivers are ready to go. Not have such a long wait time to get them up there, to get them their learners, or the next step is the test for the driving test to get your license. And then we're dealing in our county with the same thing with their program, which is a certification program. Once you get your license, you go through their program in Anne Arundel to haul the children. And that program is only done once a month. And they've said they're going to do it twice a month. We don't know why they're not speeding that process up. I do realize applicants have to go to them classes, that we got to get them in to go to those classes.
Mr. Jubb, I think
it's ready to go.
I think we're hitting our time limit here.
All right, I was waiting for you.
Okay.
I could go on for days.
All right, I think we have a question from the other chair, Chair Barbe.
Well, I'm willing to wait for all the witnesses to testify, and I can ask my question at the end there, because I think it's something that Randall or Sherry or Gail could handle. So why don't I wait until after they speak?
Okay, excellent. All right, next, I guess, Sherry Reed Gustus.
Actually, it's Gail Reed. Sorry, Madam Chair.
Gail Reed.
Switched it out on you. Gail Reed. Thank you.
Go ahead.
I just had to unmute myself. I am from Calvert County. I'm a school bus contractor in Calvert County. Currently in Calvert County, there are 24 contractors, so it's run by small businesses that operate in Calvert County. And we are on a system where all the contractors do contracts based on the same scale. We are a county that recently had drivers have many objections to the pay scale. And it was the same as with Anne Arundel County. The pay scale was way, way below all the other businesses that are operating. And the drivers did go on strike. They left the contractors and went on strike. They were eventually called in for a meeting with the Board of Education and contractors, and their pay scale was raised. So they're getting a better pay scale, which we plan to put on the contract for next year as the contract, what is planned for the driver. So that will give an increase. We also ask that the fringe benefits that go along with that be increased. A concern on our contract is the fringe benefits for the Calvert County is 23% of the salary, and statewide is 30%. So when we looked at the difference, the unemployment has gone up, the workman's compensation has increased, all the things that we have to pay for the drivers have increased, but our percentage has not increased. So we're looking at that as something that we'd like to have increased as well. None of the drivers got a cost of living increase, which was kind of crazy because even Social Security gives you that. But that's something that they are going to receive now according to this agreement. And then of course they'll come to work each day based on that. In the future, we're looking at the further discussions on the driver's leave. Currently, the leave is assigned to the bus. So for example, I have bus 6. Bus 6 is assigned 3 days leave. That driver uses the 3 days leave, then leaves and I hire another driver. The new driver that comes on doesn't have any leave. So our point is that the leave should not be assigned to the bus, but should be assigned to that route that the driver is driving. So if that driver comes in should have some leave. We're looking at possibly asking for 5 days leave for the year rather than the current 3 that's proposed. They do give 4 days if it's over, I think, 24 years. Also in the discussion that we have a problem with that we're working on now is the healthcare plan. The school system does not want to provide funds for the healthcare plan. They feel that because the bus contractors did start it and they took part of their income to start it. So it's right now, we were originally providing $2,700 per route that came from the contractor that's on the contractor's 1099. The Board of Education Calvert County Public Schools is saying that they do not want to increase that. We're kind of confused about that because it seems like it's the contractor's money that you're saying you don't want to pay. But they're saying that based on what their understanding is that they don't want to give up any additional funds. So we're looking at the county health plan, but for some reason there is something in the contract that the board is holding up to keep us from going to the county health plan. As I said, they don't want to give us any additional money. And right now it looks like we might need to supply the health plan $500 per contract more by the end of December, just to keep the health plan going. So we're trying to work with that as far as getting some additions to that. But those are some of the problems that we're facing right now with drivers. There are a number of issues with the contract because the contract seems to be set up so that there's a penalty for everything. We again have a 12-year contract with a PVA set up that spreads over the 12 years. There are other counties that have the PVA, which is per vehicle allotment, set up so that when you finish paying for the bus, you have received the majority of your money because the buses generally are paid for in 6 or 7 years. So after that, you would receive less money. Calvert County has the amount spread over 12 years. So for the bus that's the most expensive, the one that's 2021, you're basically getting $65 a day for 12 years for that bus. That is not enough to pay for the bus. And over 12 years, of course, you don't take that long to pay for a bus, or someone will come and take your bus. So we're not getting the money that we need to pay for the bus in a reasonable amount of time. That's something else that we would like to negotiate with them. We have tried and have not gotten any further so far. Many of the things that we've asked for, including the salary increase we've asked for year after year, have been turned down until the drivers walked out. This is the first time that they've actually listened to us. And it really is terrible that something that drastic has to occur in order for the system to listen or to understand what the problems are, because there are a number of problems. There are things that they understand, because our goal is to get the children to and from school safely. The drivers have been doing that. And honestly, the parents who we deal with have been absolutely wonderful about the situation. They have listened, they have understood. When the drivers didn't show up, they were thankful for whoever showed up. And I got lots of, yes.
Can we wrap it up?
Yes.
Thank you.
And all I want to say is that I am very grateful for the things that we have received, and I appreciate it.
Thank you so much. And Ms. Appel, is there a fourth person?
Steve Nelson is the president of the association. He's on just for questions.
Okay, I think the first question goes to Chairman Barve.
Okay, thank you very much. A couple of baseline things. You know, I've been in government contracting since 1981, and typically when I bid on a 4 or 5 year contract, I get an inflation escalator. Is that ever the case in your instance? Do you have an inflation adjustment built into your contract? Not that that would be adequate here, but I'm just curious.
Randy, do you want to take that?
Yeah, there are counties that do not have that built in, one of which I was a contractor in 82 years. They had no COLA built in, and it's one of the things they're asking for to be put in their contract. But in Anne Arundel, it is a COLA that is built in for some of the costs. Our bid is multi-category, and there is a column that is a fixed cost that does not get the COLA on it. Say it could be your equipment, you know, that stays the same for the whole time, payment wise or whatever, for that particular contract. So they have a fixed category, but yes, the COLA is in our contract for some of the other categories, such as a driver pay or maintenance. But we have seen that go up and down over the years. So whatever COLA's obviously happening.
And I take it that the per vehicle allotment is meant to cover the depreciation of the vehicle. Is that what the intention is?
It's meant to cover the cost of the bus.
Okay.
Let's say the average of bus. One of the issues that we have is that in Calvert County, they keep changing the specifications for the bus. So the specifications for the bus have gone up. They're requiring chrome wheels, and they're requiring extra large mirrors. They require air conditioning for all the bus, but they don't want to pay us for them.
Did you say chrome wheels?
Chrome wheels, yes, sir. It is required.
Technically,
And chrome brackets are required. Yes, those are requirements, and those are specifications.
Are required, right?
Mm-hmm. They've been sent to the dealers, and the dealers are told that in order for us to buy a bus in Calvert County, they must have those specifications. And so that drives the price up.
What's the use of chrome wheels? I'm just curious.
As contractors, we're not in favor of it, but what we've been told is that it helps the mileage. We haven't figured that out yet, but we've been told they're lighter and it's supposed to help the mileage.
Okay, and then finally, what what's the range of cost of a school bus? I assume that these are new vehicles you're purchasing rather than used, maybe purchase used, I don't know. But what's the price range roughly?
Well, I tell you, go ahead.
Oh, yeah, generally it's about $117,000 for the buses that we have to get with the specs on it. We have had a lot of problems getting them because of parts and delays. We were told if we wanted to get all our buses, Calvert County requires that your buses be checked in by July. And in order to get a bus by July, we had to order it by October of the previous year. And there's no guarantee that we'll get it because
Okay.
of delays.
And of course, there's we're buying quite a few propane in our operation, and they actually are more cost prohibitive. And then also if they're wheelchair lifts, and it depends on the spec of the bus. It can be in upwards of 125,000 for fully something with that kind of equipment, air conditioning and all. So,
and for my information, just generally speaking, how many days are there in a school year?
180.
180. Okay, so it's that $25 times 180 times 12 is the per vehicle allotment is basically what you're paid.
32,400.
Okay, thank you. All my questions are answered. Thank you very much.
There's a question from your committee.
Yeah, Jerry, go for it.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Madam Chairman. It's a pleasure to be on this last Zoom call with you in this meeting. You'll be missed. I always like coming to your committee. See, I might, might be the only one, but I always like coming to you. I'm just teasing you. You've always been very fair and nice with me, and I appreciate it immensely. My question is for Mrs. Reed. Mrs. Reed, first of all, thank you and your family for the many, many years that you've been family's been bus contractors in Calvert County. It's been more years than I can remember from the beginning. So, but I need you to re-educate me just a little bit on the specs of the buses. For the buses, the new buses, is that done by the school board or is that done by the county transportation department?
It's done by the director of transportation.
For the school board?
For the school board. He's the director of transportation for the school board, yes.
Okay.
Ed Cassidy is who is in charge.
Okay. And the second question, did I hear you right when you said that when they give you your allotment per bus, that when you buy a bus, the life is 12 years old, and they amortize it out, pay back to you over 12 years, but you're paying the bus off in 6 or 7 years?
Yeah, and that's required by law. I have to pay the bus off within 6 or 7 years. Most of the mortgages or the deals that you make for buses are, now we've gone to 7 years for a lot of the buses because the price has gone up in order to make reasonable payments. We used to be able to do it in 5 or 6 years, pay it off, but now it's pretty much 7 years. But it does have to be paid off within that amount of time. But the payment that we get is spread out over 12 years for that bus. Mm-hmm.
That you get from the Board of Education.
That's correct.
So you're digging in your pocket. You're in a negative daily number for paying off the buses over a period of time.
Exactly.
So as a contractor, you have to front part of that money.
Yes, we do.
I guess the question would be, and the answer is probably obvious. Wouldn't it be better if the county based their money to you on that bus based off of what the true monthly payments are for the 5 or 6 years, as opposed to pushing it out 12 years? Wouldn't that help your cash flow and give you the ability to operate in a more efficient way?
Yes, it would. But they would have not allowed that over time. There are some, I believe Charles County does pay more upfront than they do at the end, like maybe it's over there. It was St. Mary's. St. Mary's does too. They pay more upfront and then they pay a small amount at the end.
Charles County does sales tax.
And the other thing that's not included is the sales tax, so the 6% tax that we always end up paying ourselves. There are some counties that do pay that.
Okay. Okay, and the negotiations that you just had, was done strictly with the Board of Education or the superintendent, correct?
That was done strictly with the superintendent and Tony Navarro, who's his operations assistant. It was just done with those two. Mr. Steve Weems, who's a county commissioner, he was also there. And then I think Mr. Wills, the county administrator, was there. Some bus drivers and some contractors. That negotiation was specifically for the drivers because the concern was the drivers had walked out. So we did not deal with any contract issues because our main goal was to get the kids back on the bus and back to school. So that's why we didn't deal with anything that had to do with the contract at that time.
Okay, well, thank you very much. And again, thank you for all your years of service to the county. And I don't know how we'd operate without our school bus contractors. So that's about all I have to ask. Thank you.
Thank you. Delegate Patterson with the next question.
Thank you, Chair Kaiser. And again, I appreciate your leadership. I want to say Charles County bus drivers are the persons that had a strike October 22nd through October 22nd through 27th. And as a result of that, we hope it helped other systems resolve their bus driver issues. My question is, as it relates to advocacy, we use the term bus drivers, but are we not also talking about bus attendants? Because they too are engaged with the wages, and if the bus doesn't move, they are not working as well. That's one. And the other is a concern that some of the drivers had in terms of commingling of funds. When you look at the bus transportation, it also includes, in our county, for example, paving, vehicle, other equipment, parking lots, etc. And that's a misrepresentation of what actually is being spent for transportation. It was more like the question is for the advocates, maybe Ms. April or Mr. Nelson.
I'm not sure about the commingling of funds issue. That might be something that I have to circle back with you on. But as far as the attendance go, I know that some of the jurisdictions that are looking at Anne Arundel in particular, in looking at the new hire and retention bonuses have factored in attendance as well, because obviously they're an incredibly important part of the transportation system in addition to the drivers, and they're offering them bonuses as well, albeit lower bonuses than the drivers because they obviously make a lower hourly wage. But yes, they're factoring those in as well. And certainly we're encouraging other jurisdictions to do the same in recognition of the important role that they play.
Thank you very much. And commingling, I know, does occur in Charles County. Thank you so much.
Delegate Terraza.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So my question is about the bidding process, and I think, and this is for any of you, I think Mr. Jubb was talking about it, but I thought you said something about the bids going, there were various categories. And it may not have been you speaking about it, so if it wasn't you, I apologize. But is one of the categories what the wages will be for the drivers? Is there any, or any of the counties asking, I guess you probably only know the counties you're working with, but if somebody else knows, are any of the counties asking what the wages that the bus drivers will be paid? Is that part of the bidding process? And the benefits that'll be paid?
That is in our contract, that there is a minimum price set. That minimum price would include wages and all the fringe stuff that goes along with them, those for those wages. So that is must bid more than the minimum in some of those categories because they get a cost of living and they don't in that fixed cost category that I mentioned. So you put money in there, but you know, there are not enough categories to capture all the costs of what it takes for us to do business. Rent for parking our buses, mortgages for those bus lots, commercial lots, everything, mechanics. None of that. You have to factor in the real cost of your operation and then find a category to insert that when you place that bid. That's why somebody that's not familiar with that bid, if they were to look at it and see some of the pricing, they would have to just get a little bit of an education as to what that particular bid guy put in to cover his cost for an operation, you know, to maintain an operation. All the silly stuff, dumpster, all that kind of stuff has to go in somewhere. So there's not categories. But yes, on the bid, which is I think us and Howard, Anne Arundel and Howard, only two that have the bid, and then most of them are on the formula. And that also is something that needs to be addressed as well. So.
And then all the bids would come in with the same wage, or that's just a floor?
No, that's a minimum. That's a floor.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. Thank you.
Yes.
Okay, next question, we have Delegate Long.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Do you have built into your contract a fuel surcharge with diesel fuel and fuels going up? Do you have it built in?
I don't know if Ms. Reed's going to answer that for some of the candidates with the formula, but I think we're the same as them. There is a price. It's a calculation that's done every month. If fuel goes up, our contract, the money that we put in for our cost of fuel based on that route goes up. And if fuel goes down, the cost comes down to the county. You know, our check is less or more, whether fuel goes. They told us at the very beginning, we don't want you to make money on fuel, but we don't want you to lose money on fuel. So we have a price accelerator, or it adjusts. So, and it does that monthly.
Ours is the same. It's adjusted based on the cost of, and they have 3 to 5 stations that they use. And they get the cost of the fuel at those stations, and then they adjust our cost based on that.
One last question. Do you pay tax, road use tax on that fuel? Are you exempt?
Each contractor has the opportunity to exempt. It is not exempt through the Calvert County Public Schools. Yeah, there's a form, I think at 637, you have to fill out and file with the federal government. And then based on that, they'll give you an ID number, and then you can use that number with the companies that you get your fuel from. So there is an opportunity to get the fuel exempt. It works for fuel and tires as well, if you're able to get it through that. But you have to apply for that exemption through the federal government, get that through that form, and then you're able to use that to get exemption for fuel, for some tax, not for all, but for some.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Delegate Long. Seeing no more questions, we will thank everyone from the School Bus Contractor Association, and we'll go next to Maryland State Department of Education. We have Mr. Gabriel Rose, the Director of Pupil Transportation and Emergency Management.
Good afternoon. Just making sure that you can hear me okay?
Yes.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon, Chairwoman Kaiser, Chairman Barve. I have with me today, sitting next to me, my new Deputy Superintendent of Operations, Mr. Talor, who's joining me today, as well as Dr. Lawson, who's also here at MSTE as well. So thank you again, members of the committee, for allowing us to present to you today. We'll be doing a brief presentation on school bus operations based upon some topics that were provided to us. So you can go to the next slide. So again, the 3 topics that we're going to touch on quickly in regards to the school bus driver shortage, which we just discussed as well. We'll give an overview of school bus routing. And lastly, we'll end with the electric school bus vehicles here in Maryland and across the nation. Next slide. So some overview of Maryland transportation. Here in Maryland, we have approximately 657,000 students that are transported to school every day. Again, that's 180 days out of the year. Last year, our buses traveled a combined total of over 99 million miles. That's approximately the distance to the sun. So they are traveling quite extensively across the state. We talked about the numbers previously. In Maryland, we have 7,339 school buses that all vary in different configurations. As Ms. Appel spoke about, we are pretty much half and half across Maryland. 3,791 are owned by school districts, and 3,608 are contractor owned. In the nation, we have about 500,000 school buses transporting students. If we put those same number of students in personal vehicles, it would take about 17 million vehicles, or about 34 times that number. So our buses are being used efficiently to transport students to and from school. Next slide, please. So we'll give an overview of the nationwide bus driver shortage. At the end of the summer, 3 national associations, the National Association for Pupil Transportation, the National Association for State Directors of Pupil Transportation, and the National School Transportation Association conducted a joint survey on school bus transportation issues and concerns. About 1,500 responded. Of that, 51% described their driver shortage as severe or desperate. 78% indicated that their driver shortage was getting much worse or a little worse. And 65% indicated that the bus driver shortage is their #1 problem or concern. For a question that had multiple options for responding, 50% said that the rate of pay is the major factor affecting their ability to recruit and retain drivers. 45% cited the length of time to secure a CDL. 38 cited the availability of benefits, and another 38 cited the hours available to work. Next slide, please. So here in Maryland, we discussed this already as well. The average starting salary for a school bus driver is about $19.45 an hour. For new candidates coming on board that do not have a CDL license or permit, it takes them about a month or longer to obtain that license with the PNS endorsements, as well as to become certified as a school bus driver. Here in Maryland, at the start of the school year, only 3 counties, Kent, Garrett, and Worcester, out of our 24 school systems, reported that they had a driver assigned for every route. As we discussed earlier, in October, school bus drivers that serve Anne Arundel County Public Schools went on strike for better pay and incentives. This was later followed by Charles, Calvert, and Howard counties conducting sick-outs for similar benefits. Currently, across the state, schools can experience anywhere between 1% to 20% of routes not being covered daily due to this driver shortage. Next slide, please. So what efforts have been made? School systems have been encouraged to use their American Rescue Plan funds to provide incentives for recruitment and retainment of school bus drivers. The MVA has worked on, as Randy Jubbs stated, streamlining drivers into knowledge tests for CDL permits and skills tests for CDL licensing. The MVA has done rodeos where they have only those that are seeking a school bus endorsement come and conduct the skills or knowledge test. We've conducted 2 of them at this time, and there are plans for those in the future, I believe. A letter was sent out in conjunction with the MVA that encouraged all those with a CDL license to consider becoming a school bus driver and directed them to the transportation office for information to the local school district level. And lastly, the MSDE has continually been in contact with all transportation directors and have shared ideas and best practices learned throughout the industry, such as paying drivers through training, offering bonuses and incentives for new drivers and retaining drivers, as well as providing a required minimum hours of pay. Next slide. So I'll briefly talk about school bus routing as it relates to our school systems. Brief overview, routing is typically composed of 4 main sub issues or problems that school systems have to resolve. First one is the stop assignment, knowing where students will be getting picked up. This could be at the student's address or a conjunctive location where students get picked up in multiple numbers. Next, it's routing, linking the stops together into bus trips. So this would be an elementary school trip. All stops would be for elementary school students. Next is the scheduling. These are called tiers at the local school district level. How many different routes a school bus can do. So this would be conducting a high school, middle school route first, and then doing an elementary school route after that's finished. And lastly, school bell times. School systems have to work their routes around the start and ends of schools to know when to pick up and drop off students. Next slide. So how do school systems accomplish this? They use their software routing programs typically at the end of the academic school year, looking at late May. School systems typically turn over the already enrolled students into the next grade level or next school if they're moving from elementary to middle. So they have a starting number to begin with. They then add students that are moving in or out of the school district, adding or removing them from routes. School systems have to be prepared to add more students before the beginning of the school year, as there are some parents that don't register their child until right before or right after the start of the school year. School systems also have to be aware of families that are transient, moving in and out constantly, or that are experiencing homelessness. And even as when a route is finished or established, family dynamics can cause scheduling issues. Those that are living between two different households, those that are being dropped off or picked up at a daycare, and then a parent's house on different days. And lastly, this is always a fluid process with routing. Families move constantly during the school year. So routers have to be prepared to modify and adjust routes almost daily. Next slide. So I gave here a brief general overview of what might cause issues with school bus routes. Obviously, the first one is our general public in terms of traffic. It changes throughout the year, especially if you're looking at areas that deal with tourism or vacation, Eastern Shore down to Ocean City, accidents, weather issues such as fog or low visibility, rain, etc. Issues at school bus stops or school grounds. We do have areas in the state that you'll see more problematic issues with gang affiliations, etc., that school systems have to work around. Mechanical issues such as buses breaking down, construction, additional stops being added or removed, substitute driver experience or inexperience, and lastly, road design or safety concerns, areas that buses can't typically manage, especially if it's a larger 72 passenger bus. So next slide. So we talked about school.
Rose, you're coming up on the 5 minutes, so if you can hit more of the highlights on those next few slides.
Sure. So school bus capacity, again, is just understanding how many students you can put on a school bus. Transportation directors have to know how many students are being routed, but they also have to know what the maximum capacity of the bus that can transport those students safely. And they take these into consideration when they do that. Next slide. Most school systems tend to use routing software. This is a program that is used with school systems to identify where students are located, and then it basically creates a route for them to follow. Most of these routes have to be readjusted by staff at the local school system level because the routes are not typically most efficient or the safest. So those are changed. Next slide. So I'll end with the discussion on the electric school buses. Brief overview. In 2014, they were introduced in California, nationwide. In February of this year, about 300 were in operation across the nation. Here in Maryland, Montgomery County is planning to introduce about 300 over the next 5 years, with their plan to go completely electric by 2035. And we also have 3 other school systems, Frederick, Howard, and Prince George's County, that have received electric school buses from the Volkswagen settlement funds. Next slide. So electric school buses, they differ only in the motor and the battery modules. They look like a school bus, and they are operated very similar. The range based upon the number of batteries, the driving conditions that the driver experiences, how fast they accelerate, etc. And right now the range is expected to be between about 100 and 120 miles, depending on acceleration and other aspects of the bus. Next slide. Gave a brief overview of charging for electric school buses. There's 3 main ones right now. Level 1, which is a plug-in to any wall outlet, 120 volts. Level 2, you have to buy specific equipment to do that. And lastly, DC fast charge, which is a infrastructure modification, which can typically charge a bus in under an hour. And next slide. Cost for these right now, the expected range tends to be between $230,000 to $400,000. The cost has gone down in the past few years, but this is still almost 4 times the cost of a regular school bus. Maintenance may tend to go down as there's no moving parts within the electric school bus that would need repair or modification. And 2 major features that people are looking at with the school bus is regenerative braking, basically repowering the batteries.
We'll help with some of those things if you want to turn off the TV and hang out with them.
And lastly, the vehicle to grid technology, putting power back into the school system when buses are not in use. And that is the end of the presentation. Any questions?
Yeah, and I'm sorry for interrupting, family matter. I think we will have questions, and I have to apologize to Chair Barve and Delegate Fraser Hidalgo that I think we're going to switch to MVA. I believe Ms. Nizer, the MVA administrator, has to leave by 2:30, so we want to make sure that we have time for both her 5 minutes and any questions that there may be of her. But we will come back to you, Mr. Rose, with some questions.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much, Chairman Kaiser and Chairman Barve. It's great to be with you today. Certainly issues related to our CDL drivers have always been a focus, especially during the pandemic. It's one of those services that we continue to provide, even when our branches were really operating under those restricted conditions. As has been mentioned already, there are several things that we've done to try to address this issue. And just to provide some context, really, it is a nationwide CDL driver issue, not just a school bus driver issue, but certainly we're concerned about our youngest students and their ability to get safely to school. And so in that vein, we had done, as was mentioned, a school bus driver day. On Saturdays, when we don't traditionally do CDL tests, we did that all day regionally at several branch offices in order to be able to encourage new drivers to be tested. We've also worked with local jurisdictions in order to schedule additional days and also to schedule individuals during the week. So basically what's happening at this point, anytime a local jurisdiction or even a contractor, in many cases, we're working directly with the contractors as well. When they have drivers who are ready to be tested, we go ahead and get them assigned, whether it is during the week or during the weekend for one of these special days. I will say that one of the challenges that we're having, well, 2 challenges really. The first is the no-show rate, which is fairly significant. We have seen, the no-show rate be around the 25% mark, and clearly that takes away appointments from people who may be ready to take the test and have the ability to get through. We also see a fairly high failure rate on our CDL tests. Obviously, the standards are set by the federal government. And it is meant to be a hard test, right? We want to make sure that folks who are transporting our children are safe on the roads, but the failure rate is significant. Passage is just over 50%. And so pretty much every time we put a driver through, we're having to schedule another test with half of those drivers to be retested. So in that vein, we've scheduled another queue in our appointment system, which is a retest queue that expedites the process of them getting that second test and hopefully being successful the second time around. So that's something we've done to try to better coordinate and get them tested more quickly. We also took the step of sending letters to individuals who are CDL drivers but don't have that passenger and school bus endorsement that are required, encouraging them if they're looking for additional employment or looking to change careers to consider coming to one of the local jurisdictions. We provided a link to the school system that they could reach out and hopefully get that coordination done. So that was more than 88,000 letters that were sent out by MVA about 2 weeks ago to try to, again, encourage our CDL drivers. We also are working proactively. We're one of 3 states implementing a pilot program along with the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration for a modernized CDL test. Parts of the pre-trip inspection are fairly dated and cumbersome because they are components that are no longer in vehicles. And so we are one of 3 states throughout the country that are testing that program. We're hopeful that if that pilot is successful, we will be able to implement that statewide. Currently, we're only doing that at our Glen Burnie location as well as one of our private employer testers. We are also working with both jurisdictions as well as private entities who are interested in our employer testing program. We essentially certified those entities to allow them to be able to test their own drivers. So there have been several jurisdictions who've approached us with that, and we are working to, again, expedite the process there.
There are also a variety of other things we're doing just to facilitate and streamline the process for our commercial driver's license customers, including allowing online services, which we never allowed in the past. And we're right on the brink of our new Customer Connect modernization system, which will go live on December 6th. And that'll provide even more efficiencies for our CDL drivers, including the first time ever, the ability to get an 8-year license. It'll also allow them to use a TWIC background check if they want a hazmat endorsement. And it'll also verify before you make an appointment for a CDL test, so you're actually qualified to do that. That's one of the things we don't have right now. And unfortunately, we have some people that are blocking up appointments, again, with that high no-show rate, not allowing people to get in who are really qualified and ready to do so. So with the Customer Connect modernization that's coming in about 30 days, we'll be able to implement some of these new things and really be able to further assist our CDL drivers. But I will say that if folks have challenges, whether it's local jurisdictions, whether it's companies, whether it's individual drivers, we've put out there, we have a school bus safety email address that we've asked them to regularly send us updates. But I've also said, please contact me directly. We'd be happy to facilitate a test for somebody. We don't want that to be an impediment. We know there are a lot of other barriers that have already been communicated today, and we certainly don't want that test to be a further barrier. So with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions whenever it's appropriate.
Well, great. And thank you for hitting the time limit. Questions for Ms. Neiser? Chairman Barve, or you're saving your question for?
My question is for Mr. Rose.
Oh my God, I was told exactly 5 minutes. You're awesome. All right, Delegate Frazier-Hidalgo, do you have a question for Ms. Neiser?
No, it's for Mr. Rose as well. Thank you.
All right, well, if nobody else does, then we've gotten you up well before you needed to go. So thank you for joining us today.
Thank you very much.
And we'll go back to Mr. Rose and Chairman Barbe.
Yeah, Chrissy, by the way, gets a lot of practice hitting those time marks. So she's honed her skills in our committee really well. Mr. Rose, a couple of things. You used the term conjunctive meeting places. I assume that means a school bus stop. What percentage of students are picked up at their homes, and what percentage go to school bus stops?
So we don't gather specific information regarding the bus stop locations at the school district level. That would be information that the school districts would have. We gather other information pertaining to travel of buses, but unfortunately, we don't have that information right now. Yeah, and we can get that to you then.
Yeah, I mean, is it safe to say that the vast majority of students walk to bus stops as opposed to being picked up?
It varies across the state due to the geographical areas. I know for more rural areas, bus transportation is more heavily reliant on, stops in front of the house, whereas places like Montgomery and Prince George's, they can easily, almost all schools can walk to school in some cases, or use mass transit.
Okay, I appreciate you getting that information for me. Here's another thing that you probably don't have at your fingertips, but maybe you can get it. What percentage of students are dropped off by their parents versus using school buses? I mean, I'm old, so in those days, nobody got dropped off by their parents. We all rode a school bus or we walked. But now I imagine it's different. Is it like 1/4 get dropped off by their parents, or any? If you don't know the answer, I'd love for you to try and find that out.
Sure. So we do know that approximately 75% annually use school bus transportation to and from school. The remaining 5% can be, walking to school, riding a bike, or parent transportation. But we can get that information for you as well.
That would be terrific. And basically, to conclude, you don't manage the contracting practices of the school system. So I have to talk to MABE when it comes to contracting practices, don't I?
So we are the regulatory authority. We don't have any involvement with the contract decisions at the local school level now.
Okay, great. Thank you very much, Madam Chair.
Well, thank you. I'm going to ask a few questions and then I'll pass it back to you for your two committee members. My question, Mr. Rose, I guess 2 questions. The first being, given the challenges that we've had this school year and returning back to school and losing bus drivers, what would you say has been MSDE's role, if any, in helping solve that problem?
So I can say that we've had a conference in early October where we brought all of the directors together. This was a major point of the discussions. We brought industry information. We share information from other states of the efforts that they're doing. We shared the best practices as we talked about before. We've directed them towards the federal funding that was released, which could help local school systems operations. That is the extent I feel that we've been able to accomplish within our department.
All right, and then my second question, very different, but General Assembly passed a bill last year, House Bill 72, to try to help encourage the county schools to use more non-type 1 and type 2 vehicles. And I'm wondering what's going on with the regulations on that? And how is that being used to help facilitate the counties with their school bus challenges?
Sure. So the law went into effect July 1st. So school systems have been able to transport students without requesting permission from the state superintendent. The regulations are prepared to be published, I believe, November 19th, which would then be open for comment and go back before the state board, I believe, early next year. So these vehicles would be designed to allow school systems to pick up students, typically special needs, homeless, McKinney-Vento students, to alleviate some of the stresses that they have with utilizing a full bus to go pick up those students.
Okay, I probably have some follow-up, but I'll save those. Back to you,
Barbie,
Chairman Barbe.
Yeah, I was going to say you used a term that I didn't recognize or I didn't understand. You said was it Kinney-Ventos? What was that word?
McKinney-Vento. So we're looking at students that are in foster care.
Okay.
Homeless, transient. Yes.
Okay, great.
Yeah, I think he meant the McKinley-Vento Act, the federal act about homeless kids.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay. Well, okay, great. I always like to know the standard English definition of things. I think David Fraser Hidalgo has the next question.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Rose, I noticed when you were putting forward and displaying the advantages and disadvantages of going to electric school buses. But I did also notice that you didn't have taken into consideration any of the health benefits of transitioning to electric school buses. Can you tell me, have you done research on that, or where are you on giving a more complete picture on the advantages of transitioning to an electric school bus?
So I know that research was done previously, I believe in around 2010 or 2012, based upon diesel emissions. My office has not conducted any studies on diesel emissions of school buses here in Maryland. We share the information that's provided to us from the manufacturers and members of the industry. We provide that to the local school systems to use in decision-making when it comes, as you stated, the health benefits of the electric school bus.
Okay, I would really strongly encourage you when you're doing these presentations, if you could, I would appreciate at least a little bit more of a complete picture of the particulate matter inside of a school bus has been studied to be in some cases 2.5 times greater particulate matter than outside of the school bus. So that's, I think we need to look into the total externalities of what we're doing with our drivers and our depots and our kids getting on these heavily polluting vehicles and then almost locking them inside of the vehicle with the pollution inside. And I think that's something that we really need to take a better look at.
Isn't that so?
Evaluating, I'm sorry. Yeah. Yes.
Isn't that so?
It is so. And I would strongly request that you put more public health data in your presentation. Thank you.
Understood. Thank you.
Delegate Jacobs.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Rose, when you talked about the cost of the electric bus versus the diesel bus, that basically tripled 300% roughly difference. When you look at the lifespan based on the investment, what is the estimated lifespan on the electric vehicle without major expenses?
I don't have data right now regarding that. These electric school buses are still quite new. As I stated, they've only been introduced within the past decade, since 2014. Our buses typically have a lifespan of 12 to 15 years. So for the electric school bus, what I am aware of is that the battery life ranges between 8 to 10 years. So that is a major key decision-making of if the investment in school bus will be made by the local school district level. But our hope is to gather more information when these become put into service in Maryland, so that we can get information like that back to you.
I appreciate that. And what would the cost of the replacement of the battery be?
It varies right now. I believe the options would be a cost reduction if they provide them back to the company. Other options would be for the school district to retain them and use them as battery storage for school system or for school buildings. So I have to look and get back to you about what the options are and the cost with that.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, Delegate Jacobs. Any further questions from either of the committees? Seeing none, Madam Chair, take it over.
All right, well, thank you. We have next the Maryland Association of Boards of Education. We have Mr. John Willems. Thanks for joining us today.
Madam Chair, I'm not speechless. I guess I'll never be speechless, but it is hard to believe this may be the last time I have the opportunity to testify before you. So it's been a privilege and a pleasure for these many years. And yes, John Willems, Director of Governmental Relations with the Maryland Association of Boards of Education, and want to address these kind of multifaceted issues raised by both committees in setting up this very important briefing. I want to stress that the higher standards that apply to school bus drivers are really grounded in the focus on safety in operating our student transportation systems. And so that safety ranges from bus driver and attendant qualifications to the standards for the buses themselves, which are relatively high in Maryland. That's always been my understanding and experience as it relates to other states to which we often sell our used buses. The management of bus routes and stops, I know is a priority for school systems, but has also been a recently emerging priority for some of the General Assembly, and that our student transportation systems are regulated both by the education article and the transportation article, given the CDL issues related to the bus driver qualifications. And so we take that safety very seriously. And so notwithstanding the daunting challenges presented by the shortages of qualified drivers today, we really want to emphasize our reluctance or refusal to kind of water down any of those standards as it relates to safety. And in fact, the Federal Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, the infrastructure bill, highlights school bus safety and student transportation safety issues in pretty dramatic fashion, providing additional funding, requiring state assessments of school safety or school transportation safety, again, as it relates to the buses and as it relates to safe routes to school. And so this is important work that is kind of on an innovative cutting edge related to school bus safety. And as it relates to the shortage of bus drivers right now, all politics is local, and certainly the negotiation of contracts between school systems and contractors is a very locally nuanced realm based on available local and state resources and relationships developed over time between the contractors and the school system. And even to the extent that some school systems have relatively recently moved to bring their student transportation systems in-house. And so essentially hiring the drivers and managing the system as a school system owned transportation system. And you've already heard, I think, a pretty thorough description of how varied the approach is within the 24 school systems, many having roughly half of their buses owned and operated by employees and half contracted out and operated by employees of the contractors. So given that, we support a multifaceted approach. We support MVA's continued work to improve the process, streamline the process, and make the availability of the training much more available. I had also heard that failing part of the test shouldn't make you retake the entire test. And making testing dates more available during the week, not just on Saturdays. A number of, I think, rather common sense streamlining approaches could be taken. And it sounded like from Ms. Neiser that there is ongoing development of those efforts, and we greatly appreciate that. The funding, and we certainly are familiar with the challenges related to not only pay and benefits, but also insurance issues as it relates to our contracted bus drivers. And we at MABE have a group insurance pool that provides insurance for 18 of the 24 systems, and have worked with the bus contractors over the years on those issues as well. So we understand the fiscal challenges that are, again, they date back before COVID and have only been exacerbated by it. In terms of supply chain procurement, this is an emerging issue. We are hearing that school bus fuel contracts will not be renewed beyond early December in regions of the state. We are hearing that procurement deadlines are being pushed back related to the cycle of replacing old buses with new buses. And we may, in fact, need some legislative leniency provided around the age of school buses. The Eastern Shore, Southern Maryland, and a couple other counties have extended the allowable life of the school bus from 12 to 15 years. And so we have either a 12 or 15 kind of hard stop that can be extended through a waiver process. But we want to take a look at that if new buses are not available to replace buses that have extended that allowable life under state law. Getting into the school bus energy efficiency issues, Delegate Frazier Hidalgo and I have certainly had these discussions around cost effectiveness and benefits of shifting to electric school buses. And I really want to stress how exciting the prospect of the $5 billion in the federal infrastructure bill is relative to Maryland moving in that direction. And so we look forward to not only the environmental but health benefits being rolled out, again, in the context of the availability of funding to make that transition possible. We're in a situation right now which highlights one of the challenges where you may have a bus driver driving 3 routes in the morning instead of the one that she or he would typically drive. And it might be extraordinarily difficult to keep a bus charged for 3 consecutive routes, right? So there are some technical issues there that would need to be addressed, again, relative to our capacity right now, which is kind of maxed out and very stressed. The flexibility for modes of student transportation has already been addressed. I would say that we are somewhat frustrated by the delay in rolling out those regulations, because if you're looking at a January state board meeting to take those up, and if there are comments resulting in substantive changes to those regs, you'd be looking at another 30-day comment period, and it probably wouldn't be until March, because you can't get all that done between one and the next monthly state board meeting, in our experience. And so you'd be looking at March, relatively the end of the school year, before we would have those regs rolled out. So that's a concern. Again, I appreciate the opportunity and look forward to working collaboratively with the committees, but also the bus contractors and MSDE and MVA in addressing all of these challenges. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Willems. Chairman Barve?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I've had 40 years of experience in government contracting at the federal, state, and local level. And I'm not a big fan of cost plus contracts where you pay the cost and then give a profit margin to the operator. But do you think maybe in this instance, a cost plus approach or a time and material contracting approach might be more appropriate? Because we're in a situation now where wages have to be increased substantially in order to maintain a workforce for not only for these contractors. Do you think it makes more? Do you think it would make sense for us to introduce legislation that basically required these kinds of contracts to be time and material contracts rather than fixed price contracts? Because in these instances, what I'm hearing from these contractors is these are fixed price contracts with extremely weak inflation escalators, and that's clearly not getting the job done. What do you think? Should we go to a cost plus contracting environment?
So Chairman Barbie, if I could, three responses. One is what is the statewide and local fiscal impact of making that shift and who pays? I guess that's one and two. And so if there's not going to be an increase in the state formula or the state per pupil allocation of funding to meet any incremental additional cost, then we're turning to our county funding authorities. And that may be a reasonable approach, but we'll then have those conversations about how that impacts maintenance of effort and their ongoing obligations to pay those increased costs. And the other factor that we are certainly encountering as we're launching the blueprint, and you'll hear us talk a lot about the blueprint launch, is that there is money in the blueprint for some things, like raises for teachers and teachers with certain qualifications and assigned to certain schools, but there is not money for other things. So there is no bus driver money for, per se. And certainly not in an increased fashion, intended to address these current challenges. So we have other classroom staff like teachers' aides, educational support staff, who are themselves kind of clamoring for engagement in some of these mandated increases in salary. And we're really wrestling with kind of how to keep everybody happy and on board with this. And the blueprint does not adequately, in our view, address our costs of paying our maintenance staff and our bus drivers and our food service staff and many other related service providers in the school system. So, and these obviously amount to large dollar amounts when you're talking about incremental pay increases and benefit increases for whole classes of employees. It's a big deal relative to the funding being provided by the blueprint.
Okay, but let's say we paid for it. Do you think it makes more sense to have cost plus contracts in this instance?
I do. I think it has merit, and I think it's a conversation certainly that is timely. And I don't know that we don't in some instances is another point. I know we'll be hearing from a couple local transportation directors. I don't know that we've have good statewide data relative to all the variety of contracts that school systems have currently entered into with contractors.
Okay, nothing else. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Any more questions for Mr. Willems? All right, thank you so much. We'll come up to our last panel. We have the Public School Superintendents Association of Maryland, referred to as PASAM. We have Dr. Rudolph Saunders, their Director of Transportation with Prince George's County Public Schools, as well as Mr. Paul Lebo, the COO of the Frederick County Public Schools. Gentlemen.
Yes, good afternoon, and thank you for having us here today. So I am Rudolph Saunders, Director of Transportation for Prince George's County Public Schools. Just to give you a little bit about our challenges, we have over 130,000 students, of which we transport between 85 and 90,000 daily. Our routes go within Prince George's County from one end to the other, as well as students that we transport out of county into Washington, D.C. Of course, we border Virginia on the other side, and we do have some schools that go there. We go into Annapolis, Baltimore, Frederick, et cetera, on a regular basis. So we have a pretty wide area to cover. That constitutes what needs to be over 1,100 routes. We have over 1,200 buses, so it's not an issue right now, buses, but our driver shortage for routes currently is about 200 routes that do not have a driver. And then, of course, that also cuts into not having any substitutes for the normal shortages that are caused by, absences, people being injured, et cetera. So on any given day, we're covering close to 300 routes. Just to give an idea of the impact of that, when we're covering those routes. So it's not just the bus that should run, which is of course then late, or it hampers our ability to deliver that service in the way, but the other buses we use to cover those routes. So it impacts the other bus being on time for their later tier schools. Most of our buses within the county are servicing anywhere from 3 to maybe 5 different schools a day, every AM and then again in the PM. So there is a substantial factor. We've done a number of things to try to shorten this. In terms of our recruitment efforts, we've used every form of media, be it social media, television, radio, print media, our website, etc. We've gone to try to recruit more people with the CDL to include doing our own training, paid training, so that we take people in who have their learner's permit. And we have our driver trainers work with them in the classroom setting to get rules of the road and even take them onto one of the buses on practice courses to get them ready for that piece. We then take them through all the way through MVA and hopefully bring them on board. We found that a lot of our recruitment efforts are slowed down during the pandemic, because this was an issue, as was stated earlier, that existed pre-pandemic. But what has happened is our in-person hiring and recruitment and job fairs had to slow down. So it also restricted us to doing things virtually. So individuals who maybe don't have the access to virtual mediums to do that may not have as much of an opportunity to apply and go through the process as they did earlier. So we're hoping that very soon we can resume that. Some of the things that we've heard from candidates that have gone in the way, because we do get a good number of people that come in the door for job fairs and things, but it doesn't translate to necessarily who makes it to the classroom. The fees that are involved in getting their license, fingerprinting, background checks, copies of driver's license, etc. So we're looking at things to try to reduce, reimburse, and or eliminate some of those fees to helpfully recruit more people. We've looked at some of the other variables, such as people's hesitancy about any issues with getting their learners. So we've done a class to help people prepare for the written test and getting their learners. And just whatever we can do to support individuals who are interested in joining us. I know scheduling has been an issue, so we've tried to also expand as much as possible to our drivers the ability for expanded schedules and opportunities for extra hours overtime to help the difference in pay. Our starting pay is just over $19 an hour at $19.05, but we do have people that have the ability to go as high as $35 an hour in our pay scale, not to mention the overtime, etc. We're trying to reduce steps in hiring as much as possible, but at the same time, as was stated earlier, not sacrifice the safety measures and concerns about individuals' background, etc., to make sure we have the right people to work with us.
All right. When you're talking about the hiring process and that you can't abbreviate it too much because of safety concerns, how many extra people have been hired in the last 2 months, say?
So I have right now approximately 23 people in class to get their learners. We have a few people who came to us and already had a CDL and they just needed to get the S endorsement. So we probably have 4 or 5 people online with that. We probably have brought in since July 1, 50 to 60 people, but unfortunately we've also lost about the same number. People who during the pandemic, one good thing we had that I know some school systems may not have been able to do, we kept all of our employees whole. So all of our employees work for us. We do not contract. I probably should have said that. And during the time we were out, we kept, even though they weren't driving because we weren't transporting students, we were able to pay them during that time. When we return, not all return. So some people may have held off and waited until we return before making a decision about whether they felt comfortable, maybe because it was due to the pandemic or other reasons. So we kind of lost a bunch of people right when school started also. So it was kind of a neutralizing effect to the recruitment efforts with that. The other concern obviously was we do a lot of, like everyone else, we do the random drug testing. And sometimes while people were out, they made other decisions. So we did lose a number of people due to the results of that also.
Interesting. Any other questions? All right, Paul Lebo.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair and Chair Barbe. I appreciate the opportunity to speak with you this afternoon. I'm Paul Lebo. I'm the Chief Operating Officer for Frederick County Public Schools. And my intent is to add on to what Dr. Saunders had talked about. We have experienced many of the same challenges. Frederick County Public Schools has a system with about 45,000 students. And on any given day, we transport approximately 31,000 students, which aligns with what Mr. Rose talked about in terms of the average ridership. Ours aligns with the state standards. Somewhere between 70 to 75% of our students ride a school bus on any given day. Staffing, retention, recruitment continues to be our biggest challenge. We are currently 25 route drivers short, and then we are 15 additional utility drivers short. And what we classify utility drivers for they are full-time benefited employees, and they're the ones that help call in or cover call-ins or other long-term absences. On any given day, we have 5 to 10% of our workforce out, and so those utility drivers really help bridge that gap. So about 40 drivers in total that we are short on a daily basis. We have used to the maximum extent possible all CDL holders within the system to support daily operations. So that's staff out of our office, employees such as our routers or our dispatchers. All of our management team drives on a daily basis as well. So really is stretching our resources thin to help cover those routes. And there are routes on any given day that end up being patched out and covered late because there just simply aren't enough drivers to cover routes every single day. A couple of things to talk about it from a recruitment and retention perspective. We recently increased our starting wages, which our drivers will see effective on their November 30th paycheck. So we increased to a $20.60 starting wage for all drivers. And then all season and veteran drivers also saw a raise somewhere between 7 and 9% along their pay scale, again, in recognition of our current staffing challenges. One of the things, every county is very different. In Frederick County in particular, we're the largest landmass county in the state. So we have many routes that were already long and our buses weren't filled to capacity prior to the pandemic. And certainly we have a board set goal where we endeavor to have our routes to be around the hour mark at the maximum. We have extended that in many instances. But at the end of the day, when you are traveling many rural routes in our northern and western portions of our counties, you just simply can't extend the routes any further than they already are to maximize ridership on those routes. So the last piece of the presentation I want to talk about just briefly is some recommendations that we've talked about. We are very appreciative of the MVA's efforts, and we think some things as they continue to streamline processes could be very beneficial. We want to reiterate that we view safety as the #1 priority, so we are not asking to skip any of the safety protocols, all the alignments with our partners at the Federal Department of Transportation. We're not asking for waivers on any of that, but really it becomes a process question in our mind. So a couple of examples: fast tracking appointments for potential CDL holders would be highly beneficial. We have had a number of candidates who have come in and they just frankly can't wait for the time that it takes, a month or more to get their CDL and be in a non-pay status. So any barrier that we can remove to getting folks into the MVA to get their tests done would be helpful. Right now, there is a wait time between a week and 3 weeks to get those appointments. And I did want to touch on, Ms. Nizer talked about the failure rate. We are experience that as well with many of our candidates. And I think the reality of some of the failure is really just about the nerves of testing. If you will. So many of our adult drivers haven't taken a test in a significant amount of time. And when you sit down behind the MVA console and you see the time ticking away and you see every question that you get wrong, it can be very anxiety raising for candidates. So it's not that they are not prepared or whatnot. It's really just about that test taking process. And prior to COVID, they used to be able to go back the next day and take a test. And so there's a lot of benefit of, can I get through the test? And oh my gosh, maybe I failed, but you know what? Tomorrow I can jump right back in there and I can get it. And we saw a very high pass rate that second day. And we really attribute that to just test nerves on that first day. So right now you're taking a test, you may fail, and then you're having to wait a week or 2 weeks again before the next available appointment. So streamlining that would be beneficial. as well. As mentioned, the state offered one Saturday in September where they prioritize school bus applicants. From our perspective, we would love to see that on a more reoccurring basis. Wouldn't have to be a Saturday, whatever time that the MVA could dedicate, that we could at least tell our applicants that's a priority day. On that Saturday, as an example, our Frederick office was one of the offices that was open. We got 6 candidates through to get their permits on that day. So 6 candidates on a day with permits is a huge win for us. So we can jump them into the behind the wheel training as well. One additional piece is we are an employer certified employer tester. So we do all the behind the wheel testing. The MVA has certified us. So that's a huge win again for us. Appreciate the MVA's partnership. The challenge is after they have gone through the behind the wheel testing and they are certified, they have to go back to the MVA again to get all their paperwork processed so they can get interim documents to show that they can drive students. And then ultimately the MVA will mail them their license. But again, you're going through that appointment process. So we could have somebody who, for all intents and purposes, is certified. They just don't have the documentation from the MVA. And so streamlining, I think you're hearing the theme a little bit of streamlining the appointment process would be highly beneficial from our perspective. And I did want to again put the plug in, Ms. Nizer mentioned the letters that were sent out. We heard about that from a number of folks. It has not produced any drivers yet, but we're highly optimistic. So again, we appreciate that out of the box thinking that 80,000 folks received a message from the MVA saying, hey, here's the points of contact. So the all hands on deck is much appreciated. And then I'll quickly talk about 2 more things. We were thinking of ways that we could enhance the awareness statewide. So a statewide sort of campaign. You think of other campaigns that the state has done, to highlight issues across the state. We think that the more messaging that's out there, we advertise locally. But if folks were inundated with messages about the need for school bus drivers and the great opportunities that exist, we think that could be very beneficial. And then looking at other, maybe potential state databases that may exist, state retirees are the majority of our employee workforce is an older workforce, many of which are retirees. And so that would be a great population to tap into. So that was my comments in a nutshell, and be happy to answer any questions about the process or even electric vehicles, since that was discussed as well, and appreciate all your support and consideration.
All right. Thank you so much. Chairman Barve with a question.
Yeah, before I ask my question, I have to say, if I'd had a do-over in college, I would have gotten a 3.9 instead of a 2.9. I would have gone from B- to A+. So I'm all in favor of that. Just a very quick, simple question, Mr. Lebo. You said you've raised your wages to $20 an hour. And it occurs to me to ask, how many hours a year do drivers work? How many hours do they work?
So I think that's one of the challenges. There won't be a standard answer on that, sir. But generally our routes are about a 6-hour route a day. So if you do 6 hours times 180 school days, that's about 1,080 hours in a year. So it's about a 50%, if you consider it a 20/80 at the traditional work schedule. There are other opportunities. So I wanted to make sure if anybody's listening in, and overtime or midday routes, there are opportunities for additional hours, but sort of the baseline is about 6 hours a day for 180 days a year.
I mean, do any of these workers do anything else for school systems, or are they basically just drivers and then they do their thing the rest of the time?
The majority of ours, and I'd fail to mention that all of ours are our employees. We do not contract any bus student transportation services. The majority of ours just drive. We have experimented with offering opportunities during the day. As an example, would you want to try to be a lunch monitor in the middle of the day? I think the challenge that you'll see, and this is what we've heard from feedback from our employees, is the driving schedule is a little odd in and of itself. So you're starting somewhere between 5 and 6 in the morning, and you're not getting done until 4 to 5 o'clock at night, and you have a window of time in the middle of the day. And oftentimes that's when our employees are either doing, maybe they own a small business and that's when they're doing, or maybe that's just when they're doing all the other things that come up in life, errands and doctor's appointments. So taking the one chunk of time in a day that they have a little bit of freedom has not been enticing for many.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Any other questions for Mr. Lebo? or for Zim. Before we wrap up, do any members from either committee have a question that came to mind for any of the earlier groups? And then I do want to give the regards from the vice chair from our committee, Delegate Washington. He is under the weather today, just like our analyst from having the COVID booster yesterday. So he sends his regards. And I do see a new question popping up from Delegate Clark. You have to unmute.
Sorry about that. Just one quick question. In the summertime, when the bus drivers aren't transporting kids in that, do the majority of the bus drivers in the state, are they able to collect unemployment?
This is Gail. Yes, they are. What happened at the end of last year, I submitted, first of all, unemployment hasn't changed. They have a system called Beacon that they changed during the pandemic. So you are not allowed to send in things like you used to. It has to go online through Beacon. So there's a mass exit program that you can do at the end of the school year to put in all your driver's information so they can collect during unemployment during the summer. Unfortunately, this past year, it has not worked very well. As a matter of fact, I was on the phone with unemployment again today. I've been on with them every day this week to discuss issues because Beacon is not picking up my reports. And they're saying that my people, that the unemployment itself is saying they received my money and they received my paperwork, but Beacon is not. So Beacon is telling the person that I'm not filing, even though I never get a bill because I have paid. But so there's a little confusion with that. But they are allowed to file legally if they're off for 3 days in a row, like a Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. They are legally allowed by the state to file for unemployment. And if they're off for the whole summer, they can. And so I would get a notice generally before Beacon, I would get a notice, I'd fill it out and send it back. But since Beacon has come into play, that has not happened.
Okay. Thank you.
There's also an issue with fraud, which has become a big problem with the system.
So am I right in assuming that all the bus drivers in the state that don't work in the summer do file for unemployment is in the different counties?
Well, in our case, they are not eligible because we are still paying benefits and other things during the summer.
Okay.
Many of them do drive during the summer. They may do our extended school year and summer school program, but whether they do that or not, because we're maintaining them, they are not eligible for unemployment in our county.
Yeah, so this is getting off of it a little, off the subject a little bit, but does that mean if the contractors in Calvert County continue on health insurance benefits and other benefits to their drivers in the summer seasons, or and they're receiving compensation for that, does that mean they're not eligible for the unemployment?
Currently, they do not receive those benefits during the summer. All the money for their benefits is deducted when they are working. So yeah, the contractors pay through the year, but the drivers don't. The drivers don't pay in the summer because they don't receive a check.
Yeah, but the benefits are still available to them. So that's a different question.
But they've already paid for their benefits at that time because the money is deducted from their check during the 10 months when they work. So they paid for 1 year.
Jerry will make a left winger out of you yet.
Good people, a lot of good people have tried. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, Madam Chairman.
Thank you. Are there any other questions? Any other final words, Chairman Barbe?
No, this has been very eye-opening for me. A lot of good information and a lot of good basis for policy making next year. And you know what, Chairwoman Kaiser, I'm going to be sorry to see you go.
Well, thank you. I'll still be around, and I will say meeting adjourned. See y'all. Thank you, everyone, for participating.
Thank you.
Thank you.